Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode here on Switch City. I'm your host, Bruce Veliz, and in today's episode, we're going to be diving in and doing another one of our NBA offseason breakdown and season previews as we dive into each team ahead of the 2025-2026 NBA season. And in today's episode, we're going to be diving in and exploring the Milwaukee Bucks, as they are a team that has made some big moves here this offseason to really reshape their roster in the push of keeping Giannis Antetokounmpo and making him happy. But will that ultimately lead them to a top-tier playoff spot or even be able to do such? Well, that's the question we have to break down here today. So let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section. And without further ado, let's dive in and let's talk about the Bucks. So like I alluded to in the introduction, the Milwaukee Bucks' main point of interest this offseason is to keep Giannis Antetokounmpo happy. Is after some recent trades and moves with their roster, with sending out all their draft capital, they have really limited the potential for them to keep a championship contender together, but also they have had some very disappointing playoff finishes over these last couple of seasons. Obviously, the team has been battered with injuries to their star players, so that has definitely hindered them as well in winning these playoff scenarios, with losing in the first round to the Indiana Pacers this past season, while also having some unfortunate blunders over the past couple of years since their championship push. It has not been all sunshine and rainbows over in Milwaukee, and that has led to some uncertainties with Giannis Antetokounmpo and the front office to ultimately pivot. So this offseason, they went out and really reshaped their roster, bringing in multiple new faces and cutting away some of their key mainstays to try to reshape this roster once again into a team that can thrive with Antetokounmpo, but also hopefully persuade their superstar to stay long term and ultimately still find a way to win another championship down their light tunnel. But let's dive in and explore the additions that the Milwaukee Bucks have made this off season. So the Bucks went out and made a lot of moves this offseason. The one trade that they went out and did was bring in Vasilije Micić. They acquired him from the Charlotte Hornets after he had been traded from the Phoenix Suns back to the Hornets for Mark Williams on the trade deadline. They ultimately traded Micić for Pat Connaughton and waived Vasilije Micić, letting him go. This was a way for the Bucks to find a way and clear a roster spot, as they ultimately have been trying to trade Pat Connaughton the entirety of last season to drop below the second apron to make easier moves for them with these new CBA restrictions. But since the Bucks couldn't do it last offseason, they found a loophole this year to do it in a way of trading for Vasilije Micić. For the Hornets, we'll get into what Pat Connaughton could bring there, but for the Bucks, he had been, a solid scorer and someone that could play a pretty solid defensive battle for them in a rotational role for a couple of years, but last year, with getting a little bit older, had seemingly fallen out of that rotation. Now let's dive into who the Bucks signed. They went out and made multiple signings this off season, with parting ways with some big names. They went out and got multiple guys on veteran minimum contracts, guys like Gary Harris Jr., Cole Anthony, who they signed to those deals, as Cole Anthony was traded from the Magic to the Memphis Grizzlies in the Desmond Bane deal, ultimately waived by them, signs with the Bucks, hoping to kind of be able to work his stature in the league to secure a long-term deal and a long-term fit somewhere as a combo guard. Gary Harris, defensive guy, who's also played that shooting guard role as a veteran, is also trying to be some depth for the Milwaukee Bucks in some defense in that guard room. They also signed Amir Coffey to an Exhibit 9 deal at the moment, but with the Milwaukee Bucks still having one roster spot open, I do believe that possibility of him finding a spot within this team is still possible if the Bucks are able to let go of one of these other pieces. And then their biggest signing was Miles Turner, the shock of the offseason for the Bucks, as they went and waived Damian Lillard. They brought in Miles Turner to add into that front court, taking them away from a division rival and a team that had just made the NBA Finals this previous season in the Pacers. But with Turner obviously not getting the contract he sought out for in Indiana with a long-term extension, proving to be one of their veterans, he goes off into Milwaukee to be dominant alongside Giannis Antetokounmpo and to be those dominant front court pairing to hopefully push the Bucks and to help his security within the team, but also to help maybe keep Giannis happy. And then the Bucks made their two signings of bringing in Thanasis Antetokounmpo and more recently, just the last couple of days, Alex Antetokounmpo, two of Giannis's brothers, to obviously help the forward be happy, as the rumors of a Giannis trade have obviously been reignited with Shams Charania talking about the potential trades to the Knicks that were happening during the off season. The Bucks, like I mentioned, want to keep their superstar happy, so bringing in Thanasis, who obviously had been on the bench for the Bucks the last couple seasons, was injured last year, so was not on the team, but now brought back. Hopefully, be some great moral support for the Bucks team. And then Alex Antetokounmpo, who recently had been playing overseas, now is on the Bucks on a two-way deal. So that's where the Bucks come into play with those guys. Then they drafted Bogoljub Markovic. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, but he was a second-round pick, another European prospect, and one that apparently Giannis was very highly on the Bucks in drafting. So with the Bucks, once again, catering to Giannis's needs, they go and draft a guy who he feels comfortable in can be someone for this roster. I do think he is going to be someone that is overseas for them maybe to start off the year, but someone that could maybe come over to this team throughout the season. And then on two-way deals, they have a rookie in Mark Sears. Pete Nance, is obviously the brother of Larry Nance and has been playing on some Exhibit 10 two-way contracts over the course of his NBA career. And then lastly, Alex Antetokounmpo, who they recently just signed. So with those signings coming into play, who did the Milwaukee Bucks have to lose? Well, they did lose a lot, and we'll dive into that next. And before we dive into the losses, I just would like to cover this up. I did look up where Bogoljub Markovic, I'm sorry if I pronounced that once again, where he ended up going to. He is going to be playing overseas in Europe, so once again, a draft and stash for the Bucks, but someone that could be a nice piece down the line if he does continue to grow over there. But now diving into the losses, obviously they traded away Pat Connaughton in that one deal for Vasilije Micic. Like I mentioned, they wanted to get off of a contract, and Vasilije Micic was heading overseas, which is maybe overstating where we'll get to, but as you can see in the graphic, he ended up going back there. So with that being said, it was basically trading Pat Connaughton for a draft pick or for an empty roster spot, and for the Bucks, who have been seemingly wanting to move off him for the last couple of years, that does fit. But for the Hornets, he can be someone that could be a solid wing veteran, who obviously could be a spark plug off the bench, but if not, just a good voice in the locker room for a young rebuilding team that's trying to change their direction and culture with second-year head coach Charles Lee. But let's go into who the Bucks lost in free agency, as they ultimately did lose two key vital pieces to their core. Obviously, representing one of them is Damian Lillard. Unfortunately, his Bucks tenure just did not go the way that many fans really saw fit, and unfortunately for the NBA, a lot of these recent superstar trades just haven't really panned out for the team acquiring said superstar, and that's where the Bucks really kind of fall into play with this one. Just fortunate for the Bucks that with this duo that was, talked about for years in the past and was one that could have been very, very dominant, just never got to live to its full potential due to the injuries and the second apron restrictions that the Bucks were seemingly in with this roster constructed, with obviously Chris Middleton and Brook Lopez getting older but seemingly still needing to be quality veteran players. The Bucks had to sign them and seemingly overpay for them maybe a little bit comparative to when they would have in the past, because other teams were trying to pry them away, and if they weren't able to bring them back, they would lose them for nothing. That ultimately put the Bucks in a tougher situation, making it harder for them to make trades to reshuffle this roster, with them getting older in age, and even with Damian Lillard and Giannis Antetokounmpo dealing with injuries and seemingly having a lot of not depth because they didn't have the draft picks to select it, or not hitting on their late draft picks. The Bucks really were falling into some tough places, and for Damian Lillard, they ultimately do end up buying out and stretching and waiving his contract due to the fact that they would rather invest into Miles Turner and trying to push an all-win-win now for Giannis this season, because Dame is going to be out for all of next season dealing with his Achilles injury that he tore in the playoffs. So for the Bucks, this is hopefully a little bit of a reset to make them competitive this year instead of, weighing on the possibility of Giannis leaving. But this could be a measure that could really hinder them for the future if Giannis ultimately still does end up asking out in future years. Now, they also lost Brook Lopez, who had been a vital part for their front court rotation. And with him and Bobby Portis seemingly being free agents, it was kind of clear that one of them was not going to be brought back. And with Brook Lopez gaining interest from teams that needed center, it seemingly looked like he would be the first one to go, and that is what took place as he goes to the Clippers, which I think is going to be a better role suited for Brook Lopez at this point of his career, which is a backup big behind one of the better defensive ones in, obviously, Ivica Zubac. Lopez, I think, stretchability and ability to go out and play from the three-point line, which we've seen grow in Milwaukee comparative to the beginning of his career where he was on the Nets and on the Lakers, where he was a back-to-the-basket rebounding big. That has obviously been a great add for them to help spacing, but also I think once again with Zubac being out, still needing that defensive big man and someone that was just in the Defensive Player of the Year conversation just, I believe, 2 or 3 seasons ago, even with him still being an older player. I don't know if he's going to be in those conversations now, but obviously still a vital part on that defensive end when still being able to play out there. With him getting older in age, I think him not being a starting center, even if he could still be at that level, I think he finds more success being one of the better backups, and I think this is going to be one of the signings that's going to hurt the Bucks the most here, is losing a guy in Brook Lopez. Even though Miles Turner can still complement Antetokounmpo in the ways that Lopez could, I still feel like he was a key part for their success, even getting a little bit older. And then lastly, they lost Stanley Umudia, who was signed a Exhibit 10 deal with the San Antonio Spurs, and then Jamare Bouye, who was recently just waived by this team. Like I said, 2 days ago, I had already made the Bucks graphic and had to edit it before recording this because I had remembered that the Bucks had signed Alex Antetokounmpo and have waived Jamare Bouye. He was a two-way player with this team, had played with the Wisconsin Herd. Unfortunately, since he was just waived, has not signed anywhere yet, but could be picked up, signed to an Exhibit 10, or could be going overseas. We'll have to wait and see. And then lastly, Vasilije Micić. He is overseas and he is gone. He is going to a team in Tel Aviv, which he was rumored to go and play for dating back to last year. So that being said, what does this Bucks team look like? How does their rotation fare with losing Damian Lillard, losing Brook Lopez, but still being able to want to go all in with Giannis? Well, here it is. Ultimately, I think the starting five is going to be Kevin Porter Jr., Gary Trent Jr., Kyle Kuzma, Giannis Antetokounmpo, and Miles Turner for these very reasons. Porter Jr., regardless of how he is as a person, as a player, has been solid for the Bucks. Even though if I don't necessarily think that he deserves to be a player in the NBA at this very moment, he is a solid initiator, playmaker, and someone that can be a scrappy defender for this Bucks team that they're definitely going to need. He's someone also that can be a solid catch-and-shoot scorer, and for Giannis Antetokounmpo, who's one of the main interior scorers, he needs players on the perimeter for him to be able to hit those threes. And I think a guy like Kevin Porter Jr. can do that in some occasions. Gary Trent, who was one of the better veteran scorers last year on a veteran minimum contract, re-signs with the Milwaukee Bucks here this off season, and I think very similar is going to play that role. Trent across the league has been viewed as, a very good six-man but solid starter if he's complemented with the right enough defensive prowess. And I think with Giannis and Kevin Porter Jr., that can complement him pretty well. The one key question in this starting rotation that really has me questioning it, but could be a little bit of a surprise, is Kyle Kuzma. Obviously, the Bucks acquired him last year for Chris Middleton to once again go in for that all-in playoff push. They felt like Middleton had kind of reached his peak with this team, and they moved off of him, similar to how they did with Jrue Holiday. Regardless of how that makes you feel as a Bucks fan, ultimately, Kuzma didn't really bring that beneficiary factor on the court. I thought it was going to happen. It ultimately didn't. He didn't fit in like a glove. At some points was just standing in the corner, and when he wasn't hitting his three-point shots, just wasn't really fitting in with this team. And for Middleton, he looked a lot better on that Washington Wizards team, being that veteran coming off the bench and being that leader. So ultimately, for the Bucks, I do think this is a little bit of a question mark. I think Kuzma fits a little bit more at the 4. Maybe if you're running Giannis at the small ball 5 with Kuzma and running another 3 alongside them with Taurean Prince and Amir Coffey, I think I could see a little bit more balance with this lineup. But ultimately, I think that's where the little gray mark comes in for me. And I think for the Bucks this season, they're going to realize that and have to move off of Kuzma and ultimately to find that perfect complementary piece if they want to keep Giannis happy. But speaking of Giannis, let's dive in and talk about a guy who I think is still going to be in this MVP race, regardless of how his team shapes up, because of how dominant of a player he truly is. The two-way force is going to absolutely unleash, and I think is seeking revenge, not only to prove it to the Bucks, like, hey, you need to do everything to put good players around me so we can see success, so we can be good, but also If this team doesn't live up to expectations, I think Giannis wants to have the best overall season out there. So when he is on his 1 year of deal, he can request a trade and find a way to not only secure himself to a team that's going to build around him and build that championship contender, but one that is going to give him the money that he so well deserves of being a top tier player and willingly build that team around him. And I think that's something to keep an interest on with the Bucks. And then lastly, Miles Turner, like I mentioned, I think complements a guy in Giannis very well, similarly plays a very good style like Brook Lopez, just is a little bit younger, and I think is still going to help out within that front court, helping out in those rebounds. And with them obviously having a deep in front court with Bobby and Giannis being able to play the small ball five, I think these rotations will be solid with even how the team looks right now on the depth chart. But ultimately, I do think that a player in Miles Turner is going to be very successful for this team, even though he did leave the Pacers. And I'm excited to see how he really looks and shines within a new organization. So now that we talked about the starting lineup, let's look at this bench lineup, as I think they do have some intriguing young pieces here, and that's where a guy in AJ Green really sticks out for me. The guy has been a solid catch-and-shoot scorer for this team and kind of resembles Sam Merrill a little bit in that role for the Cleveland Cavaliers. I know Sam Merrill and AJ Green, obviously both second-round picks, guys that had kind of gone through the grind to kind of get up there. Sam Merrill maybe a little bit more of a playmaker than AJ Green, where Green's more of a spot-up scorer and shooter, but I do think that both of them can present valuable roles with their three-point shooting for their respective teams as kind of a young shooting guard, and I'm excited to see what they can develop to be. Cole Anthony is another one within this unit who I know for the Orlando Magic kind of fell in their rotation, wasn't really as efficient, kind of a little bit worse on the defensive end here, but I do think if he has an efficient season similar to how Gary Trent had last year with the Milwaukee Bucks, or even a guy in Malik Beasley 2 seasons ago with the Milwaukee Bucks on a veteran deal, I think a guy in Cole Anthony could be able to rebuild his value across the league and maybe even secure a deal like a guy Malik Beasley would have gotten this year, a 3-year, $14 million deal, if the gambling complications didn't really come into play. And I think a guy like Cole Anthony, with his creativity, his playmaking ability, his shot creation, if those consistencies of being a solid shooter can stay, he could be that valuable piece, maybe even for the Bucks, as you know, another young scorer similar to Gary Trent to complement Giannis Antetokounmpo, or he could work himself onto another team being that valuable piece. When we get into this wing room, obviously Torrey Prince I do like as a veteran. I do think he complements Giannis a little bit more, but I do have to give the nod to Amir Coffey here because I do like his hustle on the defensive end, and I truly think is that true defensive wing that you need around Giannis Antetokounmpo. Somebody that's going to be a pass-first player, someone that's going to be valuable without the ball in their hands, as Giannis is mainly going to be controlling the offense and dominating the paint, and I think he seemingly is a better plug-and-play piece than a guy in Taurean Prince. He's also, I believe, a little bit younger than Taurean Prince, which could also give him the nod within this rotation. Chris Livingston, I don't know too much really of within this backup 3 rotation, so we'll have to keep an eye on him. But I do think a guy in Amir Coffey, if he does get that final deal here on that Exhibit 9, which I do think he rightfully does deserve from his preseason play, he will be, a guy really utilized within this rotation. Then lastly, going into the backups here for the front court, we got Bobby Portis Jr., who recently re-signed, was someone also used as a tradable asset for the Bucks, but I still think will be someone very valuable, as he obviously is a fan favorite with the Milwaukee Bucks. And that man has ingratiated himself within that culture. Everybody loves Bobby, and he really does bring out that emotion and that heart. We've seen it in the past with him on teams, but I think it really does fit in with the Milwaukee Bucks. He complements Giannis very well with his spacing and his ability to rebound, shoot the 3 ball, even if it has lessened a little bit with him still getting older in his career, and still can play that small ball 5. So ultimately, with him, Giannis and Miles Turner, and them having the ability of where they're not, any bad players at all of them could start in the NBA for a respective team, I do think that 3-man rotation is going to be very valuable. And then you have Jericho Sims, who obviously didn't look the greatest on the New York Knicks, but had a little bit of a revitalization, with the Bucks last year. I think he could be still a solid rebounder and rim protector if he does shine in some of those smaller minutes. And then diving into the end, Ryan Rollins and Thanasis, I think he's just a moral support guy, if I'm going to be completely honest. I don't know how much he really gives. Ryan Rollins, though, I will say, is a very intriguing piece. He was someone that started towards the end of this Bucks rotation, but towards the end of the year really moved himself up and ultimately could even be that starting point guard or bench point guard to kind of start the year. Maybe we do see AJ Green and Gary Harris getting bumped down in the rotation for some Ryan Rollins, because he is kind of what Kevin Porter Jr. can bring as, a solid playmaker as well, and I think can kind of maybe rival Kevin Porter Jr. within that rotation. But ultimately, with Cole Anthony still being there, Gary Trent still being there, I don't necessarily know if he does take that ranks. Maybe it was due because the Bucks had so many injuries, but maybe it's because they have seen him shine with them kind of depleted. They do give him a little bit more leeway. So with that all being said, we've talked 20 minutes about the Bucks, which is probably the longest team I've talked about so far. So with that being said, where do they fall in the rankings? Ultimately, not that high. A very, very lower seeded, and one that may come to surprise. It's 8th for the Bucks, and I have them just over the Hornets, Sixers, Heat, Raptors, Wizards, Bulls, and Nets. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Giannis Antetokounmpo, I think, could arguably be stated for versus any of these cases, and you would understand why I said it. But ultimately, taking that out, comparative to the top 7 teams here in the East, even if the West East is a little bit weaker, it's just a lot to ask for, right, with this Bucks team, right? I think for Milwaukee to be at its best potential, there are a lot more guys you are asking for to play at their best. And for this Bucks team who has a lot of uncertainties with that, I don't necessarily know. Like Kevin Porter Jr., we've seen him succeed for the Bucks. We've seen Gary Trent Jr. succeed for the Bucks. But can Kyle Kuzma be this 5th starter, or is he going to be someone that, even though he should be starting, just can't mesh well, can't play with this team, and has to be forced to this bench unit, right? Has to be playing this backup 4, in which now Bobby Portis has to be this backup 5, in which Jericho Sims is now this 3rd string, in which Taurean Prince, Amir Coffey, and maybe even a guy like Gary Harris is a little bit utilized a little bit more to fill in for that small forward role. And then if you're the Bucks, do you really want to be paying $20 million or a little bit more than $20 million for a guy coming off your bench? No. So you're looking to trade him, and can you find a trade that really works? You don't have a lot of draft capital. That's what really confuses me. And then also, once again, I feel confident in Cole Anthony that he can take this rise comparative to Malik Beasley, but what happens if he doesn't? What happens if he does have these really bad shooting splits where he still is inconsistent coming into next year? Or what happens if Taurean Prince just doesn't have that lateral quickness and just isn't as available as a defender for this team, right? Or who's to say that this front court can stay healthy, right? What if they lose one of these guys? Then Jericho Sims has to be a more vital piece, right? There's just a lot of questions with this Bucks squad. I ultimately do feel confident in some of their players, and that's why I have them still 8th. I still have them above teams like the Hornets, the Sixers, and the Heat, even though Giannis Antetokounmpo should realistically take them a little bit higher. But the teams above them, ultimately, even if they do have injuries, even if they do have star players out, I do feel like they mesh a little bit better and ultimately come together better as a team. I feel like their coaches can also bring out a little bit more. Not that I've taken coaches into consideration with this at all, but the Milwaukee Bucks have Doc Rivers as their head coach. Much more that I should have to say about that. We've seen Doc's success over the last couple of years. It's not that great, and I don't necessarily know if his voice is going to be that leading voice in this locker room that's going to be able to change things like it seemingly has not in the past. So ultimately, the Bucks, they finish 8th. Could they be a little bit higher? I won't lie to you. Yes, I do think that the Bucks could shape up and could be probably that last playoff team at the highest at 6 in the West. But ultimately, I do think the other 2 teams that fall ahead of them, even if they do have injuries, just have the depth, have the core, and have the stability of a good coach and a good organization and a good system ready to put forward their product, compared to the Bucks, who are throwing things at the wall, hoping that Giannis stays happy, and then if Giannis is happy and plays well, that they can have some success going into the offseason. So let me know your thoughts down below on the Milwaukee Bucks. Sorry for this one being a little bit longer, but like I said, we're diving in, breaking into every single team before the start of the year. So if you want to stay up to date on everything NBA and getting these previews, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Let me know your thoughts and stay tuned, because if your team has not been talked about, I know we have a week to NBA basketball, but I guarantee you that every team will be coming out. So definitely stay tuned to make sure that you get all the latest on your team and my thoughts. And then, like I said, we'll talk more about the NBA once the season actually continues and actually gets underway. But once again, thank you guys so much for tuning in, showing your love and support, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Have a great rest of your day, and peace out.